Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Um, my name is Scott Murray. Um, I've been an organic farmer for 48 years now. I got my start at UC Santa Cruz, but really got my start when my mom taught me how to grow food and shared with me the lessons of living through the Depression. They were very fortunate. They had a little 2-acre farm. And organic certification is one of the things that I do in my consulting business. I help clients get organically certified, and our family is pretty devoted to that. My wife is an organic inspector, and in a normal year, she might have already, she hits about 20 states a year doing inspections all across the country. Um, so we're organic agriculture consulting and organic inspection services. Um, Oh my God, I got to update this. I put 46 years there. Laura's been an inspector for 14 years after farming for 18 with me. And we specialize in helping new growers become organic and help them to maximize the utilization of their farm's assets. We work with growers to improve their organic practices and to add innovative crops. Um, and that's a really big thing for San Diego County. We have to innovate for change. Um, so I'm just sort of curious for you to think about, um, and you can put in the chat function if you have a specific answer for this, because we're interested in where people are. But are you a fruit grower, and what fruit are you growing? Or are you a row crop grower, and which row crops do you grow? Are some of you already organic and want to improve your practices? Um, who's interested in becoming organic? And then what do you know about becoming organic? That's more of the question for you to think about in your head, because um, by the end of this conversation, you'll have some more information about that. So one of the organizations that I've worked with since 1984 is California Certified Organic Farmers, based in Santa Cruz. And it was really convenient because that's where I was farming when I was going to UC Santa Cruz. Um, and sort of the core part of organic certification is record keeping and verification. And so the core record keeping we call the organic system plan. So um, we have now we have a national standard. When I started back in 1984, we had state by state standards. We got up to 26 states before we then developed the national standard, and we have the National Organic Program, or the NOP, which is managed by the USDA for the organic industry. Um, there are 30 plus third-party accredited certification organizations, and these are the organizations that the USDA manages to do the field work for them. Um, and then you get to choose the certifier that meets your needs. I always suggest to people that they look at CCOF's website, ccof.org, because it has they're very welcoming to new and small growers especially. But one of the classic documents at the beginning of developing your organic system plan is this page. You can be a grower, you can also be a livestock, or you can be a handler who processes organic. We have sort of 3 subsets of documents for each, but this is the document that you would first print out and start to go over from the CCOF package of documents, because it sort of defines which documents you need to have in your package of NOP documents, your organic system plan, when you apply for certification and turn in your application. Um, so the word organic is now regulated um, by use rules. And if you package your product for sale off the farm, you must use an approved label to inform the public about your product. The label requires several components, such as the farm name, and the certifier name has to appear underneath the farm name. That's one of the rules of it. The certifier could have their logo on the label, but the USDA logo has to be the largest one. There are a few words that they don't want us to use, but pretty much an organic label is pretty straightforward. But before you print organic labels to go out into the marketplace, your certifier requires you to submit them for pre-approval. They sometimes spot things that would disqualify your label. And if you've printed 10,000 labels, you're pretty sad about having to sticker all those labels over the part that's not correct. And you must list a certifier if you say you're organic. That's how the program works. And one of the biggest questions people have, or that I hear folks say, is that organic is very expensive to do. And I actually have to quibble with that, because yes, it's costly. You do pay an application fee. You are inspected initially, and then you're inspected annually, and you pay a small tax on organic sales, which is sort of your fee to be certified annually. Um, but we have a small farm in Vista. Our annual cost came out to about $650, and now we have a cost share that the State Department of Agriculture, Cdfa, runs for the USDA, and they'll pay you back up to $700 of your certification expenses annually. So that's kind of a neat feature. But one of the other important features of it is that you have to also keep track of the materials you bring onto your farm and use in your farming. They all have to be organically approved. And all of the inputs that you apply on an organic farm must be reviewed and approved for use on an organic farm, on your organic farm. And this helps protect your certification. And you must also keep detailed records of all the inputs. So we keep a receipt. Like I recently bought some organic fertilizer. It says organic on the receipt and the product name. And that's part of the records that we will present each year to show to our inspector. But we also keep a record which can be as simple as a calendar. We use for our primary record keeping just a small calendar on our farm here in Vista. We make note of the days we irrigate in which section, but we especially make note of when we apply materials to our farm. So for example, we use some compost that's made by San Pasqual Valley Soils out by the Wild Animal Park. I love it, a dairy on Old Milky Way. What a great name for a street. That product is approved by OMRI, the Organic Materials Research Institute. And on this label I'm showing, you can see in a square down here, it has an OMRI logo. And that's a really good indicator that the product that you've found is going to be approved for you to use. But the reason that we have to submit is that products change. They may change the formulation. They may disqualify themselves from being called a product for organic agriculture. And I almost always take pictures of all the labels of things when I remember, because they're part of my record keeping. It's like, oh, what was that product? Oh, here it is. Cold Springs Egg Farm. It was the organic fertilizer pellets. So, and so details of materials allowed for organic production versus prohibited materials. So when you first start your farm, one of the documents in the application is called the land history. And you need to show that no prohibited compounds were applied for the last 3 years. 3 years and you can become organic almost immediately. It takes from 60 to 90 days from the start to the finish, because you have to submit the application, it gets reviewed, then an inspector gets assigned, they come out, they walk your farm with you, look at your documents, look at your plan, and they submit their report. And then upon final review, you get your organic certification. But so allowed materials are reviewed to make sure they meet the rules for organic production set by the NOP. And there are some things which people might not think. For example, we are able to use vaccinations for animals, and we're able to use some products that are essential, as it were. But this is what a list, once you're certified, CCOF, for example, as part of your organic system plan, has your materials list. The one that I'm showing you here, there's 5 pages. And I list all the different products I want to use, that I am using, or that I may need to use. One section of this is organic pest control components. If your crop, for example, this one was set up for avocado production. So we have certain diseases that we can't really do that much about, but pests we can do a lot about. And so we have pest control tools. So we put those on our list in case an outbreak of like Persea mite happens. Several years back, we had 7 days of 100 degrees in June, and that caused the Persea mite to just blow up. And so we had to fly on with the helicopter the approved oil to choke out that pest. So if, for example, you treated your farm, maybe Roundup was sprayed on for weed control last year, then that means, okay, that was 12 months ago, so you'll be eligible for full organic certification in 24 more months. But you have to be practicing organic that whole time, because that way you don't create another problem. And that's an amazing piece of the puzzle. So there are many parts of farming which we have learned kind of innately, like we take care of the habitat on our farm, you know, but over time farming has gotten to be more and more impactful on the natural resources and biodiversity. And those are two things that we encourage very strongly in organic agriculture, is that every year you're enhancing your natural resources rather than degrading them. We call things like soil building, or compost added to the land to increase organic matter content. Every 1% increase in our soil organic matter content means the soil can hold 4 times more water. And one of the best things for us to do is to store rainwater in our soil under our crops, to reduce the need for irrigation. If we let it all run off, then we let somebody else use it. So one of the first things that happened in the 60s, Robert Rodale went to Congress and said, we need support for organic agriculture. And the senators that he was speaking to said, well, we have no statistics. There's no information. So we can't put any money on something like that. And he said, well, if you put some money on it, maybe we could develop the information for you. And they said, well, that's not how it works, sir. So Mr. Rodale went back to the Rodale Institute, and they came up with the idea for a side-by-side program, strips of conventional of 3 practices and strips of organic of 3 practices. And they've now been doing this side-by-side demonstration for 45 years. It is rain-fed agriculture in Pennsylvania, dryland agriculture. But they've seen some amazing things. The organic farmers consistently over those 45 years produced very similar yields within a few percentage points, we call margin of error, of the conventional growers. However, they got a higher price for their crops because of the organic premium, which can be 5 to sometimes even 20%. And it was determined over time that their costs of production were actually lower. So the organic farmers in this study have been making 2 to 3 times the money per acre that the conventional growers do. And that adds up. So organic fields have a very biodiverse environment that supports beneficial insects and pollinators and a mix of native species and animals. One of the examples of that is we have a lot of bug-eating birds on our farm, and it's amazing to watch them sit on a post and then flit over and grab this huge grasshopper, and it's like, oh, you got them. They make a crunching sound when they fly by. So this is another picture from the Rodale Institute. And it shows how the strips are arranged. Like we're looking at an organic manure no-till strip. Manure versus compost is one of the tests that they've done. So the organic production has proven to produce similar crops to the conventional. In the 44 years to date, they found no significant difference in production yields in good rain years. But this is where it really is a noticeable difference. In drought years, the conventional yield would drop up to 80%, and the organic yield would drop maybe 20% due to the organic matter content of the soil they've been building up for the 40 plus years of this study, holding more and more water. So when you have a dry period, the soil steps in and supports the crop to grow. And when you're combine through a field for 20%, it's hardly worth it. But when you run it through 80%, you're still paying some good bills, and probably in a year when prices go up because of supply. So the big thing with organic is the required record keeping. It's not outrageous, but it is important because this is how we continue to show the certifier and the inspector that we're doing what we say we're doing. Application records can be simple, like the calendar we do, or some of the ones that I do for my clients are a complex spreadsheet that we record each category of work that they do on the farm, so we can also help them to track costs and benefits. But keep and organize all receipts for inputs purchased for the farm. One time in my work to bring 121,000 acres of pasture land into organic cattle production, I was driving with the farmer and I said, so where are your records? Where do you keep your invoices for purchases of animals and feed and things? And he says, well, look by your feet. And we're driving along in his truck and I looked down and there's all these crumpled up pieces of paper in the floorboards. And I was like, oh, Lord. And that was his practice. He'd sign a receipt, crumple it up, and toss it over on the other side of his truck. And he couldn't imagine that he could bring pieces of paper back to the office. So we used a modern technique with him. Every time he created a receipt, a bill of lading or something that was important, I had him take a picture of it and email it to me. So it became another way to get those records. We also keep sales records, which tie to your harvest records, and which should these days even identify the area of your farm picked. If you have multiple big zones, that helps. But the harvest records and the sales records are also kept to make sure that growers are not raising 2,000 pounds of organic carrots, but selling 10,000 pounds of organic carrots. Also, we do natural resource observations and improvement actions. So observe and make notes on that same calendar. Like when we start to spot the birds that migrate to San Diego, we have a lot of bug eaters, flycatchers that come from Central America. So we'll make a note on the calendar when we first spot like the golden oriole or other birds that are important to our farm. And these records end up being the key to showing your organic practices and materials. And so your organic system plan, again, is the key part of your operating business plan for the farm. It's the organic business plan for the farm. It's a basic building block of creating an organic operation. We record things like the day we put down seeds if we're growing transplants, or we buy planting stock, or we transplant. Soil fertility building practices are especially important because that is something that organic growers are expected to do every year and actually increase the quality of their farm rather than degrade the quality of their farm. So it might be producing compost on the farm from leftover materials. Our pile right now has a lot of tomato and pepper plants in it because we just pulled those out to put in a cover crop, which is another thing that we record on our system, on our records. Pest control on the farm and in the packing shed, those are important. We can't use any prohibited practices, but we have very successful tools that fit organic for every level of it. One of my clients is a meat handler, meat processing plant, and we have that whole plant run on organic protocols. But it means things like when we clean stainless steel tables, we use a cleaning agent that will evaporate fully and not leave a residue, or that if we have something that's required like quaternary ammonia that does leave a residue, that we rinse it and test that there's no presence of it where organic will touch. And another fun thing is a good but simple farm map that shows your production areas and neighboring activities. For example, one of the big questions about organic is, oh, my next door neighbor has a conventional orange grove, let's just say. And so we are expected to buffer our organic activities from the conventional activities. And the minimum buffer is 25 feet. So it doesn't seem like very much, but we also encourage very close working. For example, don't spray on a windy day with a pesticide that's noted for its ability to be carried on the wind, because you'll contaminate my crop and my farm, and I'll have to go back and decontaminate that area for up to 3 years if it got significant impact. So, and the farm map is pretty easy. It can be generated from one of the APN maps that you might have. My simplest is just to get a satellite view from like Google Earth of the farm. I print it out and I trace the outline of the farm, and then I fill in the features, like here's the neighbor and this is how big the buffer, and the neighbor's conventional oranges. Here's another neighbor, they're organic oranges. We don't need the buffer, and we can be organic right to the fence line with them. So these are important parts of the puzzle as well. So the record keeping is key. All the things that show the ebb and flow of the farm, harvest sheets, packing sheets, shipping records, invoices with organic listed for each certified item. Your invoices going out should also have the same. If you're selling organic navel oranges, that's what it'll say, organic navel oranges. Now, then I mentioned the certification costs. So there's annual certification costs of being inspected annually. You pay the costs for the inspector, and you pay a very small percentage fee based on your sales. We also require in California what's called Cdfa organic registration. That costs between $50 and $75 a year. It can be done online now. And this is the tool with which the California Department of Agriculture manages organic farming within California. And that cost share is a really good thing. In the last year, it was spoken about to be reduced from $750 to $500, but there was quite a cry about that, and that was dropped. We'll see. So, and then the California Organic Registration, CDFA's website, you can do that online. It takes me about 10 minutes to set someone up, and they even nowadays, take your money online too. But also one of the exciting things about organic is we're into innovation. Like all farmers have to be constant innovators. San Diego County has gone through a number of cycles of crop production. We used to be one of the largest producers of lima beans in the United States on the coastal plain between Camp Pendleton and Del Mar. Those dry land farms on those beautiful rolling hills, they would grow lima beans because they could get them up with the spring rains, and then they went deep into the soil and worked off of the stored water. And I remember going out to watch the last harvest there along Palomar Airport Road, one of the last fields, which is now a complete industrial park, but it was a field of lima beans. Then we had olives, which were also good before irrigation. And most of our water districts were developed for irrigation purposes, like Vista Irrigation District. They've never changed the name, though they have not too many farmers compared to the old days. So it's an important connection. So one of the big things that's happening now, our avocado industry is over 100 years old, and we basically grew the trees the same way at about 28 to as much as recently I went to a grove that were spaced 60 feet apart. And those were the biggest avocados I've ever seen in California. They were like 80 feet tall. And I said, we have to stump these trees because number one, those avocados all look like golf balls. And there's, state regulations about how high we can have ladders and pickers go these days, about 35 feet. So one of the future innovations is high density. This is a picture of a high density orchard in Fallbrook of avocados. Just today, I'm working on planting a high density orchard of deciduous trees on my farm. I'm putting them 6 feet apart in row and 10 feet apart row to row. I have a very tight area. I'm getting over 100 trees into that area. And I'll keep those trees productive through pruning, and I'll keep them to a small size to avoid the cost of most picking on ladders. You always have a little bit, but like most avocados are all picked on long ladders with long poles, whereas these high density trees might only get to be between 14 and 16 feet, and you just use a pole for the fruit on the very top. And it's an important part. What are we going to grow in the future that makes sense water-wise? Or when we grow high density, for example, we can double or quadruple the production of our farm per acre for basically the same amount of water. Now on my farm, we're putting in 2 sections of high density trees. They'll be at the 6-foot spacing, and between each tree, I'm planting a tea camellia plant. Except for in the first row, there'll be blueberries because the tea doesn't like that much direct sunlight. But once we get back to the 3rd and 4th row, there'll be enough shade that the tea will give me another crop. They'll be below where the avocados are, trained and pruned, and I'll be utilizing the water very effectively. So this is a photo of a 2015 interplanting of coffee that I did for a client in the Morro Hills Ag District. And the trees were 50 years old. When we started planting, they were 47 years old. And we actually had a grove service manager, a wonderful gentleman, Salvador, who as a teenager had planted the trees and then ended up taking over the business and retiring when we planted this coffee when they were 50 years old. And he said, of course, coffee won't work here in California. No way. Organic won't work. I tried it. It's a pain in the ass. No way. But the truth is, this coffee planting, the white dots are actually coffee protection structures. I'm a little more conservative about establishing this unusual crop. So the first year, I put it inside. I have a gopher basket because gophers love coffee trees, and we have a lot of gophers. And I put a cage around it, and then I wrap that cage with agricultural fabric so that baby coffee tree gets an early protected start. It can develop a strong root system, and they generally will fill up these cages by the time we let them out in 1 year. This coffee, the first coffee produced from this grove, sold for $796 a pound roasted. So there may be a future for coffee production in San Diego County. We still have a lot to learn, and it's a very high cost labor crop because every single individual ripe cherry has to be picked separately. But you never know, it might be the wonderful crop here. On my farm, I have a collection of 40 different varieties I've assembled. I want to test varieties, and I'm testing growing techniques and high density as well. So that's the main part of my presentation is, and here's the regrown stumped avocado kept to now 15 feet, and then the coffee trees in between. We were able to utilize the old pattern and work within it. So we would take 5 alleys, we'd keep the 2 on the outside, and the middle 3, we'd plant 2 rows of coffee, also 6-foot spaced, high density. And it has worked out very, very well. So now I'm interested if anyone has any questions.
Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
My name's Julie.
Hi, Julie.
I really appreciate this. This is all brand new and it's very interesting, and I appreciate you going over it quickly and efficiently, but thoroughly. I'm curious about the neighboring activities. I took a tour of an avocado farm over by Highland Valley Road, off of Highland Valley, and the farmer explained that they come in and they spray. He's conventional. They come in and they spray. Their employees can't go in the groves for 2 weeks, and yet there's homes surrounding this area. So when a home came up for sale, I asked the realtor, I said, what's the, how does the pesticide spraying work? And she didn't, that was the brand new topic for her. How do you find out? Are there records, you know, a place I can go look up pesticide spraying records to find out what neighbors are spraying?
Actually, in 2 categories. You being in California, we have the strictest law. So farmers like myself, we have to have a pesticide operator ID number with the County of San Diego, and we have to report every time we spray, where we spray, the amount we spray, the product we spray. On a monthly basis, we send these in. It used to be on these 3-part forms, which are a big job, but now it's all computerized, so it's actually pretty easy. But in California, for operators that are licensed, you can get that information. So a farmer who buys a prohibited compound, for example, a Roundup is sold at supermarkets, at Home Depot, at places like that. Here in California, homeowners, we have what's called a self-prescribed law. They can decide that they're going to use this compound, and it's made available to them in smaller quantity sizes and in much greater dilution. So if I buy 5 gallons, if I were a conventional grower and I bought 5 gallons of Roundup from Grangetto's Ag Supply, it would be about 100 times more concentrated than the product you would get at Home Depot for use around your garden. But we're licensed, also trained to properly handle those compounds. And all organic growers are also required to follow this law, because almost all of the things we use are also registered. Everything that has an EPA registration number on the label, we have to report. So in the early days, when I started farming, we would make a lot of our own pest control components. So we would be using coconut oil soap and adding cayenne pepper if we had one type of insect problem, or we'd be adding garlic to it if we had another kind of insect problem. Some folks even used tobacco. Tobacco is actually extraordinarily toxic as a pesticide. But if you had grown that tobacco on your organic farm, you could actually use it as a product on your farm. I think they've tightened up the rules on that one. So you can go to the county Department of Ag and ask for access to the pesticide records for the addresses adjacent to you. That would inform you. B, the growers actually are highly regulated. We have to have proper face covering, we have to have eye protection, we have to have gloves, we have to have a respirator. All of that to spray Roundup. And my next door neighbor, when I lived in another part of Vista, he used to go out and in shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt and spray Roundup all over his yard.
Wonderful.
You know, and I'd be running around to close all the windows on my house because the wind blew towards me. But he had to have a liver transplant because possibly that compound, which has a tendency to destroy liver tissue, caused those problems for him. So then the other part is, if you want to be organic, we post, we put up signs, this is an organic farm, please no spray. We also have to communicate to the county roads department, because they have a program of spraying Roundup along some roadways in the county. Now, if we put our address in that database, and the truck is driving down the road spraying, the computer in the truck knows that it's come to your property, and it stops spraying, and then it starts on the other side of your property. It's pretty amazing.
That's fascinating.
Our former agriculture commissioner, Kathleen Thuner, was concerned, and she put the technology in place to protect the citizens. So did I answer your question?
Yes, very much. That I can go to, in other words, my husband and I, if we're looking for,
Property.
property,
Yep.
I'm shying away from areas that are next to big groves of avocados, because I'm assuming they're probably using helicopters to spray, like this outfit in Highland Valley. So I can go to the Department of Agriculture and look up addresses, is what I understand.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. Okay, good.
And to select a property, especially if you want to become a farmer, is a little trickier thing. I do a lot of that advising for clients that are buying property. We go out and we look at it, and I practice a technique I've been learning over my career, which I call near future farming archaeology. If the property had a farm on it, we try to figure out, what was this old farmer thinking and doing here. And sometimes I went to a citrus grove the client purchased, and they said, well, I said, do you have a well? And they said, oh no, we don't have a well. I said, well, these citrus trees couldn't be here because they're older than Vista Irrigation District. I will tell you, there's a well on this property. As we walked around, I found this pile of wooden rubble in one corner of the property, in the perfect spot to put a well. And I said, I think this is the well. So we lifted stuff apart, and sure enough, they actually had a well, and they were able to rehabilitate that well and go back into farming on that property, just by fixing the well and improving the pump. So, and we do want to think through, what are the neighbors doing? And one of the issues for the buffer between a conventional and an unconventional grower is steep hillsides. It's not a good thing to be below a conventional operation, because rainwater runoff, unless it's controlled, can be a problem.
That makes sense. It's a good point. All right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Julie. Anybody else have a question for us today?
It does look like you have a couple questions in the chat box.
Okay, thank
want-
you. I'll open it. I wasn't looking. And I'll take a sip, excuse me. Water to keep the voice working. All right, Michelle Mann. My question, does it help to become organic for a vineyard if we have sprayed nothing on it since it was planted in 2017? Well, vineyards have one difficulty, which is Pierce's disease. That is, some growers are almost all organic in their practices, but they use something to control Pierce's disease. But we have a lot of organic vineyards. We even have some vineyards that follow the organic plus biodynamic practices, like the Fry vineyards up in Napa Valley. And so what you say here, if nothing's been sprayed since 2017, you're eligible to go into organic right away based on the land history. Especially if you've owned it, you can actually sign that. When people buy a property, like Julie, I make sure that they take to the closing a land affidavit, because that's the one time you'll get a chance to have the other person fill it out and sign it. And if I was just buying your property and you said, okay, we haven't sprayed anything since 2017, I'd ask you to put that on this form and sign it, and it would be part of my submission for organic certification. So you may find that organic certification will be valuable for you for a number of reasons. It'll change the look of your farm. Organic would encourage you to grow cover crops, for example. In some vineyards, we grow cover crops in the alleys, and some grow right up next to the vines. Others will have a strip that's mulched, for example, right directly underneath the vines. The cover crops are very good for supporting a diversity of insects. We have insects that cause problems. The bad players are almost all controllable by good players, what we call beneficial insects or predatory insects. And so by encouraging habitat diversity on our farm, we provide pollen for these insects to be on our farm 52 weeks of the year. And when a population of something they like to eat builds up, they're right ready to move in. A conventional grower can trust that they can spray at the last minute to kill a problem because the materials they're using could be so deadly that they can knock down all the insects. Though they do have that reentry period that was mentioned earlier. Some products say can't sell for 14 days or 21 days, or you can't even re-enter the field for those periods of time. Many organic pesticides are so benign to humans that they're allowed to be sprayed the same day the crops are harvested, which is pretty good. So, and you may find the value in growing organically for your grapes because you can also consider intercropping your farm and having additional crops that you could sell as organic. We have a second question from Janice Duvall. Do you incorporate permaculture principles in any of your farming methods? Absolutely. This talk is not about permaculture or agroecology, but I will say some that most conventional farms have become to look very similar in that they are a one thing for massive spaces. Like last year when I had the opportunity to go to Pennsylvania, driving out to the Rodale Institute through miles and miles of GMO cornfields or GMO soy fields, that was about all we saw for miles and miles and miles. It's pretty easy to assume that they are conventional. We know organic growers of corn and soybeans, but their fields are completely different looking. There's a diversity. A number of row crops these days are planted with rows of alyssum, the beautiful little white flowers of the low-growing alyssum. If you go to the lettuce fields in the Salinas Valley, every 7th row is planted with alyssum because it will support beneficial insects that the scientists have watched will go out 4 rows and control the insects in the lettuce. Cover cropping is another thing we do. In the lettuce production in the Salinas Valley, they did a study recently, organic fields that were already producing organic, but just with compost, they added cover cropping, and the yield of this one farm increased by 1,000 heads per acre. So they doubled the production. They would harvest 1,000 good heads with the organic matter from the cover crop. They were getting 2,000 good heads per acre per harvest. So there are some benefits. And the broader concept of permaculture is that we look at the whole farm as an organism. If there's a creek going through, if there is a little bit of oak forest, each of those parts becomes some important part, how they interact and how they work together. And the concept of permaculture is we plant for nature basically to do the work and to be permanent about it. In tree crops, they sometimes will call this forest farming. So that's a whole huge amount, and that's an area of specialization for my work. Agroecology is another word that is very similar to permaculture, though permaculture is Bill Mollison and Toby Hemingway came up with it. And agroecology, we look at the whole as a holistic organism. So we also have a question from Linda Hargrove. How far can conventional pesticides travel in the wind? Different products have different characteristics. and there was a weed killer that was outlawed for use about 20 years ago that pretty much could carry for at least 1 mile almost full effect from a spray zone. And they discovered this by the railroads were spraying it along the tracks to control the weeds. You know, you don't want to drive through a brush fire in a train. And but if there was any wind when that rail car that was spraying, it would blow into the fields and it just killed all their crops. So different crops can travel different distances, the speed of the wind, the droplet size of the spray rig, the direction of flow. Some spray technologies for trees, for example, use heads that are called fogger heads that almost create a fog so that it will adhere to both the underside and the top side of the leaf to get the insects where they hide. And truthfully, now the regulations tell farmers that they're not supposed to spray pesticides on windy days. The helicopter pilots are extremely sensitive to wind drift of their sprays. The helicopter has a wonderful way of pushing the spray down and kind of creating a fog, and they're very precise with their edges and that. But it's always a concern. And one of the best ways to alleviate it is to work with your neighbors and let them know what you're doing, and let them know that you would like to make sure that they don't accidentally damage your crops. Great. Does anyone else have a question? Well, one of the things that I like to make myself available. My email address is very simple. It's Scott A. Murray at sbcglobal.net. So it's just my name, Scott A. Murray at sbcglobal.net. And I'm available. Oh, thanks, Katie. I could have done that. And this is also my business. I'm a farmer day to day and a consultant to other farmers. So if I can help you with a simple question like these, or if you need more help to make a decision, for example, do you want to buy a piece of land? These days, if you're going to buy agricultural land in San Diego County, it's best to have one that already has a well on it, because the cost of water is becoming a huge factor in the cost of production for San Diego County crops, and it will influence the change in our crops. For example, the old individual monoculture avocado groves, we used to water 24 hours. And the guys would go to the field at 4 o'clock, turn the water on. They were supposed to walk it and make sure there were no leaks. And then they'd come back the next day at 4 o'clock and turn it off. And I'd drive by and there'd just be water pouring off the hillsides. And the weeds in the creek were 16 feet tall because of all the fertilizer. And then we cut that back to about 12 hours. And now I actually advise my clients to pay attention to how avocados grow. And I suggest a method called rainforest watering, which is more similar to the way it is if you live in Central America where avocados grow. We'll water for 2 hours, 3 times a week as our normal rule. And that allows us to save water to add, like this last few weeks that we got of our summer blast where, it was in the 90s for weeks. Well, you've been saving water, and you can add more to strengthen your trees. We also recommend irrigation sensing technology as one of the new tools that's happening for growers. One of my other jobs, I chair the board of the Mission Resource Conservation District based in Fallbrook. Mission RCD has an agricultural program. Lance Anderson is our agricultural program manager. He does irrigation evaluations that are paid for by water districts, and they help find out the efficiency of an irrigation system and determine improvements that can improve that efficiency. the average irrigation system that we inspect in San Diego County is only operating at 55 to 60% efficiency. So out of 10 trees, 6 are getting an equal amount of water and 4 are not. Generally, we're able to tweak those systems and tune them up to get in high 90s, 95% average. So you're getting more use for your water. Mission RCD also has an irrigation center program. We received a grant from California to help some growers put sensors on their properties. But these sensors can tell you at what level the water is and in what quantity it is on your farm, so that you're very carefully applying irrigation when you need it and not too much. And it alerts you when you're deep water, right? We're going into a 2-week hot spell. You want to store more water down deep. You want to do several longer irrigations so that the roots have a savings account right around them on those hot days, because they can't take it up hot fast enough. 2 years ago, we had 117-degree days for several days. And we lost a lot of avocados during those days, all around Southern California. One of my growers in Ventura County, they lost 80% of the fruit on their trees, just dropped. Oh, we're out. Finished that year's. Of course, the next year, the trees were really excited to produce. So they got almost caught up. So let's see, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. How are people doing? Any last thoughts? Wonderful. So my phone goes off. So one of the things that I want to just highlight for everybody is that farmers need to be in a network. The Farm Bureau is one of your network partners, and other farmers are one of your network partners. The state, the federal government, the USDA, but especially the National Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS. We have an office in Fallbrook, the NRCS office is in Escondido, Mission's office is in Fallbrook, and the NRCS can help growers with a number of important things. It is initially for erosion and water protection. That was 75 years ago during the Dust Bowl. It's expanded now to cover all resources, but they also have some economic development programs for farmers. And one of my favorite ones right now is what's called the High Tunnel Initiative. A high tunnel is a relatively simple greenhouse, generally plastic walls. The federal government has a standard that if you apply for the program and choose a unit to that standard, generally 28 by 100 feet, they'll pay 50% of the cost of that greenhouse as a reimbursement once they see it installed. And that program was expanded from 1 per farm to 10 per farm. So you could put almost an acre's worth of greenhouses in at half the price with support from the federal government. It's one of the few agencies that actually does things for private citizens as their work. They also work with other government entities in that, but their primary focus is the private farmers of America. We have to be innovative as well. That's one of the biggest keys. So if you're thinking, is organic a good choice for me? Look at the marketplaces. Go to some local stores and see what the products look like and taste them. When we grow organically, we tend to get the best tasting food because we supply it with the building blocks of nutrition and taste. And we get a premium price. Back in the day when I started in organic, the produce manager said, if there aren't any holes in the apples, I can't trust that you're organic. And I said, that's not how it works. If we do our work right, the apples are absolutely beautiful, and we don't need to have bugs in them to prove that we're organic. And then enjoy being a farmer in San Diego County. We have over 600 different crops produced in San Diego County, and we're the 7th largest agricultural county in the nation, dollar-wise, and we're the largest county in the nation for the number of farms, though our farms tend to be a lot smaller, average of around 10 acres, versus some of the farms in the Midwest, which might be hundreds or thousands of acres and just corn or soybeans. So San Diego is an amazing place. And I just had a climate scientist tell me the other day, we were talking about coffee, and he said that you may actually have a bonus coming your way for San Diego County agriculture to be able to grow more tropical things like coffee on a consistent basis in the future. But there will be challenges with the water. So thank you for joining us today. I hope I inspired some of you to look into organic, and it was always a pleasure to speak to other growers and support them in their work.
Thank you so much for your time, Scott, and for sharing all of your knowledge.
It was a pleasure. And you
All
folks
right.
have a great week. I'm going to go back out and plant fruit trees. That's what they were calling me. Are you done?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day.
Thank you, folks.